welcome to the second Tuesday Times Roundtable of the fall 2018 semester. I want to give a brief introduction on earning Global Learning Medallion points while you're here if you're not doing so already. So first of all, that means if you're not a Global Learning Medallion student, but you are an undergraduate student, you're welcome to grab one of these flyers on the way out, which has our website, goglobal.fiu.edu/medallion. You can earn this graduation award for a variety of things, but one thing that counts towards it every single time you come is a Tuesday Times Roundtable series. If you're a current medallion student, or if you end up signing up, you might have questions about how to get points at this and other events. We do have this handy dandy points log, which is available on our website and you can print out when you go to sign up. I'll also make my best effort to bring some copies every time. So I have them on a clipboard. You can ask me for them afterwards if you need one, but you can also print them out on our website. At the Tuesday Times Roundtable series only, because we're hosted by the event's hosted by the same office that runs the medallion. If you forget this or something one day and you sign in here, when you get back to your points log another time, which you should ultimately have one, you can write the day and time, the day of the roundtable you came to, and you wrote signed in an event. And when you turn this in at the end of the semester, because it gets turned in every semester, I can access our attendance records. But for other events, which might be hosted by other departments, then we cannot always have the sign-in sheets available to us. So you want to make sure that this is your primary method for getting points at events. But I'm always available for questions before and after this and other events that I'm at, and you can. I'll make sure that it makes sense to you there. And if you didn't grab one, we also have schedules of the entire rest of the Tuesday Times Roundtable series. So I'm happy to introduce today's moderator, Alfredo Garcia. Alfredo Garcia is the executive director, associate executive director. Gave you a promotion there, right? Is the associate executive director of the Miami City Ballet. Prior to working in this arts administration field, Alfredo received his master's and PhD in sociology from Princeton University, where he conducted an intensive 3-year study of the global art market, high net worth individuals, and changes to neighborhoods. His study focused on the changes in Wynwood, Miami, where he lived for 3 years during his study. Alfredo is also a former instructor here at FIU and at UM, holds a master's from Harvard and a bachelor's from Duke. And then I was reading this earlier, and I thought at this point I wanted to say, even though he taught and got degrees from all these places, FIU is clearly his favorite. And I would have said that even if he didn't write it, but then I kept reading, and he actually wrote in here, although he has attended and worked at several universities, he holds a tremendous love for FIU, FIU students, and the Global Learning Initiative at FIU. And though he didn't use the word favorite, I know that's what he meant. So thanks for being here today, Dr. Garcia.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yes, as you heard, I used to teach here at FIU, and I really do have a strong love and admiration for the institution, but particularly the students. I taught several semesters in the Honors College, in the Sociology Department, and in the Religion Department. And what I tell everybody is that FIU students are full-time workers, full-time students, full-time family members. They work full-time, overtime, and part-time all at the same time. Does that sound like you? Yeah, right? And so I deeply admire and respect all the students that are here at FIU, and I thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. Now, my type of teaching and my type of lecturing is not just speaking. It is actually interactive. So I will ask that you participate throughout the hour that we have together. And my goal is ultimately to discuss changes in the world of art here in Miami, but to tie it into larger trends in global wealth. So it's a big task. And I spent 3 years studying Wynwood, trying to understand how it is that changes in cultural, what we call cultural consumption, can shape a neighborhood. So how many of you have been to Wynwood? Yeah. Okay, so, ideally if you're under 21, you're not having drinks, but you go for drinks, right? Exactly, right? Even if you're under 21, I'm not the bouncer. And so how many of you have noticed how fast it's been changing? Anybody? Yeah? So what are some of the things you've noticed that have changed? Yeah? For Wynwood or for FIU? Really? Awesome. Cool. Growth. Right. And how do you measure growth? How many of you have seen growth? Who would agree with growth? Yeah, what do you think of when you say growth? Bicycles? Yeah, definitely. What else? Buildings. A lot of new buildings. So when you hear the words cultural consumption, I want to ask a very general question that seems a bit arcane or a bit silly, but why might a person consume culture. And what does it look like? So first off, what does it mean to consume culture? What does that mean? Yeah. Well, a field part of Miami, but that a little too general. But what does it mean to consume culture, like as an individual? Huh? You pay money for what? You pay money, it's true, but you pay money for what? Not a member of society, a little too general still, but let's think like literally. You pay money for? Experiences. Bing, bing, bing. So what kind of experiences? Food, fashion, yes, exactly. How else do you consume culture? So you pay for things, huh? Music, you buy music. You might support an artist, yeah? What else? Travel and leisure, definitely. Big money to be gained there. In fact, one of the largest leisure companies in the world is based here in Miami. Carnival Cruise Lines, anybody heard of it? Yeah, big money baller right there. Big money baller. What else? What else does it mean to consume culture? Eating, buying a painting, right, is consuming culture. Playing music or attending an orchestra, all these things we said. Now, all of that, and that is correct. Now, all of that answers the question, why do we consume culture? And it answers it because we like the culture. We like the thing that we're doing. But as a sociologist, I'm much more interested in thinking beyond just individual preferences. And I want to think, what are some of the things that are at a social level important about consuming culture? So why else, and now we're going from the literal about buying things, and we're going a little bit higher on the theoretical level. Why else would we consume culture? And it's not affiliated to just because we like it. Why else would we consume culture? Eric? Yeah, actually, so a lot of people do. And some people turn it into a business. So notoriety, right? How many of you post things just so people know that you were there? Everybody in this room should be raising their hand right now. Everybody in their room. We all do it. Yes, what else? Yes. Status. All of that in one word, status. Huge reason why we consume culture is to show people that we are cultured. It's kind of nasty, but it's true. We want people to know that we went to the opening at Pam and that we were invited. Because, did you get the invitation? Oh no, sorry. I got the invitation, not you. Definitely. What else? We're on the right track here. Why else do we consume culture? So we have status, we have notoriety, yeah? Network. So I'm taking what you're saying and I'm just making it into one word, networks. Now, why would networks matter? Business. Bingo. Now, what we just did was we tried to identify what is cultural consumption and why does it matter. So first off, cultural consumption is often putting your money where your mouth is and actually buying or attending something. That's what we in sociology call cultural consumption. But secondly, the question of why we consume has to do with because we like it, which is an individual level, and often we do things just because we like it. But at a much higher level, theoretical level, we do it because there's other social benefits. And in this case, it's status, prestige, networks, those types of things. So now we have step one. What is cultural consumption and why is it important? Now, step two. How does cultural consumption vary based off of your social class? So sociologists are really interested in social class. Are you working class, elite class? And we often talk about different levels of social hierarchy based on how much money you make and what kinds of environments you're found in. So how would cultural consumption vary based off of social class? So let's think. Somebody give me like an example of how it might vary. So you already said something, you've said a lot of great stuff. Somebody who hasn't said anything yet. How would your cultural consumption vary based off of how much you make in life or where you find yourself? First off, you don't have the kind of capital, right? The kind of money to go to certain things, right? That's exactly point number one, correct. What else? How else might your cultural consumption look differently based on what social class you find yourself in? Wonderful. Exactly. So there are certain types of what we call preferences, cultural preferences that are tied in to certain types of social classes. So for instance, are you a big fan of opera? No. Be honest, it's okay. Who here loves opera? I don't love opera, but I'm a big fan. I mean, I work for the ballet. It's a different kind of world. But who here really, really loves opera? I would be very surprised because right now I'm talking to a social class of students, right? You guys are college students, and opera is expensive, right? It's not part of your subculture. So one of the interesting things in sociology that we find is that people of a certain social class consume certain types of social goods that identify them as being a part of that class. So let's think about the board chair of Miami City Ballet. She's my boss. Makes big bucks. Do you really think she's a fan of Jay-Z and Beyonce? No. Come on, we can be honest. She probably didn't know that Queen Bee was here recently, right? Is it Queen Bee or Queen Bey? Both? Okay, because ever since I stopped working here, my amount of cultural knowledge has significantly decreased because my students were the ones who were telling me what was cool and what was not. So I really don't know what it is anymore. So we have now first identified what is cultural consumption, why is it important, and then third, we're tying in the way that we consume culture to where we are in the social class. As a result, all of that is to say, we as sociologists are interested in changes to social classes and money and how that change will change cultural consumption. Did you see what I did there? We went from what is cultural consumption, why is it important, and how is it tied to social class? As a result, you can have changes in cultural consumption can lead to changes in social class? Rarely. But often than not, we get changes in social class lead to changes in cultural consumption. If you're with me, give me a thumbs up. If not, then leave your hand down. Okay, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about why that's important. So basically, when you are a member of a particular social class, you consume certain social goods, certain cultural goods that are tied in with that class. And therefore, the quick and dirty is rich people like opera, lower class people like other things. Rich people go to, gallery openings. Lower income people don't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's multiple subcultures within all those classes. That is the setup. So now what I want to point out is when we're asking the question, how have the arts changed in Miami? A big part of it has to do with how has global wealth changed. So I want you to take a look at this graph, and I wonder, can everybody see it? Okay, so this is a graph of what we call HNWIs, high net worth individuals. Now, HNWIs are technically, that's the technical term for rich-ass people around the planet. These are very wealthy people who have at least $1 million in what we call liquid money. So what's the difference between liquid money and assets in general? Anybody know? Yeah. Bingo. So some people are very wealthy and they have lots of assets, but it's locked up. And the reason it's locked up is that it's in stocks. They haven't sold them yet. It's in real estate. It's just sitting there as a physical entity. So in order to make that money liquid, they have to sell it, and oftentimes they may not sell it quickly, et cetera. So having liquid cash means you can write a check for $1 million and it won't hurt your bottom line. That's what we call high net worth individuals. So this is a graph of high net worth individuals at the global level from 2010 to 2017. Now, tell me, give me an example of any observation you can make by looking at this graph. Give me anything. Let's just go right out in the start. What are some observations that you have from just taking a look at this graph? Anything. Yeah. Interesting. So you notice that Asia Pacific is a lot larger than Africa, which has traditionally been smaller. Very nice. So you noticed a regional difference. Very good. What else? Yeah. So it's growing the most. Yes. So the rate of change is more for Asia Pacific. Yes. And it's surprising. We can come back to that. But What else do you notice? Pretty stagnant. What about overall? Increase, big time increase from 2010 to 2017, and there are regional variations, yeah? Now, the two heaviest hitters are Asia Pacific and North America. Now, North America makes sense, and we'll just do a quick aside because you noted it, but why would Asia Pacific be increasing? Big China, or as our president says, China. So we got China buying a lot more art, left, right, and center. China, Singapore, Hong Kong. These are major economic centers in the planet. In fact, the joke is that there's only 4 types of economies in the world. Growing economies, declining economies, Argentina, Japan. Those are the only 4 types because Japan is an outlier. It's, ever since World War II, it's just become a massive economic powerhouse. So this is interesting. First off, we have a tremendous increase in the number of high net worth individuals worldwide, and there's a regional variation. Now, if we take a look at this graph, it starts to demonstrate exactly what you guys were saying. Notice the amount, I wish I had my laser pointer, the amount of people in the United States compared to Japan, Germany, and China. So 61%, so roughly 2/3 of the world, of the world's wealthy can be found in just those 4 countries. So now, we've identified a different type of social class, the high net worth individuals. And using what we previously argued and found out that there's a link between social class and cultural consumption, we now ask the question, how is it that the massively wealthy can change cultural consumption or can change city life? So let's think. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's making millions a year. I know it's hard. They say that money doesn't buy happiness, but I would rather cry on my yacht. Have you heard that? So they say, you know, it's hard to be a rich person. But what would you do as far as cultural consumption? What would you do if you had all that money? Travel. What else? Invest. Invest, but let's think of culture. Would you invest in culture in some way? Yeah. In what? So like, give me an example. Like perfect. Yes, so like the Medici family of today's. So the Medicis supported Michelangelo. Was it Michelangelo or Da Vinci? Now I'm questioning myself. Well, one of the two. And there was the massively wealthy family in Italy that put their money into great art. So we have travel, we have investing. What else would you do? You would commission art. Ask an artist, I really love your work, but I want something all of my own. Go. What else? Yeah. Pay off student debt. I'm sorry. It took me years. Well, what about also just buying art in general? Like going and buying great pieces? Because there is an art market out there, right? Now, the art market for visual art is, I would argue, part of a fulcrum moment for Miami, transitioning Miami from being a no-name southern regional city to suddenly becoming a major arts destination. That is the punchline for today's talk. Visual art and the consumption of visual art by high net worth individuals is the reason that Miami changed. And we are witnessing that change happening right in front of our faces. When it comes to visual art, where do you normally go to buy art? Where would you go if you wanted to buy a piece of art? A gallery. So galleries are the place where you go to buy art. Those are different from museums, which show art but don't sell them, or collections. For instance, the Rubel family collection in Wynwood, which is a private family that has so much art and so much money that they can build their own museum to show their own art. So if you go, and you can go to the Rubel family collection, the Margulies collection, the De La Cruz family collection, all of which are in the same 5-mile radius in Wynwood and the Design District. You can go and you will have an experience of walking through a museum of just these people's private art. It's like their living room for the public. It's amazing. It's amazing to think of this. So you go to a gallery. And it used to be the case that if you were wealthy, you would go to certain types of galleries around the world to see what it is they have. So you would go to New York, and you would go to Chelsea or Soho, and you would check out like my buddy Joe's gallery, and Joe gets great art, and he knows what I like, and I'll go. Or you might go to Berlin, and you might say, oh, I want to meet with my partner, my art partner there to see what it is that she's gotten recently. It used to be the case that you would travel and you would consume at the same time. But over the course of the 90s to the present, a new type of phenomenon really became popular, and it's called the art fair. So has anybody been to Art Basel? Right, I think everybody, we've probably seen those tents, right? You've seen those giant white tents. And even though Art Basel is located just in the Miami Beach Convention Center, we in South Florida have called that whole phenomenon of tents in Wynwood and tents in in downtown and everything, we call that all Art Basel. The art fair is the opposite of what used to happen when you buy art, when you purchase art. You would go to your gallery owner and you would ask them, what have you got? Now, the best gallery owners in the world pack up their stuff and bring it to one location every year, and then all the people around the planet start flowing through that city one time a year. So it's known, for instance, that every December in Miami Beach, there will be Art Basel, and there will be a ton of wealthy people coming in to buy art. Six-figure prices for art, sometimes 7 or 8 figures for art. What we find is that the art fair has created a kind of immigration flow of some kind of incredibly wealthy people who have no other reason to come to Miami. I mean, December in Miami is quite nice, but when you're that wealthy, you could go anywhere on the planet. Why would you go to Miami, right? But they come for art. They come because they know Art Basel is here, and that Art Basel is where you can purchase that kind of art. So in 2002, Art Basel had its first year. That's not that long ago. In the grand scheme of things, that is not that long ago. In historical perspective, that's a blink of an eye. And over the course of 2000 to the present, Miami has become a global destination for high net worth individuals who are seeking to consume culture, to consume visual art. And that is massive. That is huge. Think of how many major cities there are around the planet. Why would Miami, the site of the scene of Miami Vice, or the scene of cocaine cowboys, right? The place where nobody speaks English. I mean, we're talking about these stereotypes that the world has of Miami. Why would Miami become the place where high net worth individuals, ultra wealthy, come to purchase art? Miami is so significant as a destination that even the New York Times listed it as being one of the major sites where the super rich, what we call high net worth individuals, where the super rich go on a yearly basis to consume different types of cultural things. So we've got Davos for the World Economic Forum, Monaco for the Grand Prix. There's another Art Basel, but that one's in Basel, Switzerland. All the way up to number 12, Art Basel, Miami. So in the circuit of high net worth individuals traveling the planet for cultural consumption, Miami is now one of the few cities that has become a stop, a layover, a site to visit. That's massive. Now, why would that be important? So we started off by saying, what is cultural consumption and why is it important? We then drew a link to how culture and social class kind of mirror each other. We've identified a particular social class, the high net worth individuals, the super rich of the planet, and we have now demonstrated that the super rich identify certain locations and flow through there in pursuit of their cultural consumption. So now the question, why does it matter? Why would this be important at all? And I'll ask you to think of that question by saying, you are the mayor of the city of Miami. Why, for you, would this be important? Said a lot of good stuff. Somebody who hasn't said anything yet. In what way? So you said it's because of the people who live here. In what way? Yes, it does affect them. How so? Yeah? In like what? Build a building here. Yeah, I like how you're thinking because these people do think in buildings. Yeah, they think, we think I might buy a dress this weekend. They say I might buy a building this weekend. So first, great point. Yes, investment. So first off, it does affect people in the city. Second off, it's because these high net worth individuals might flow through and invest. What else? What else? Yeah? Movement, key. Now you said in that region. So give me examples of what you mean by movement of money. You're correct. Give me a concrete example. Or anybody. Well, in general, I'm still talking at the city level, not just a neighborhood level. Bingo. That's what it is, just buying things. So it's like restaurants get packed, right? Stores, even tiny things like a grocery store. I mean, if you think about it, maybe these high net worth individuals are not going to the grocery store, but at any given moment, a hotel might need a major purchase of, last minute goods. And if it's last minute, they don't have to ship it in, they'll get it at Publix, et cetera. So there's a tremendous amount of flow of money. During my research, I looked up because I was thinking to myself, I wonder if it's true that these high net worth individuals are flowing through Miami. So what I did was I went to the FAA. What's the FAA? Anybody know? FAA. The Federal Aviation Administration. So the FAA manages all flights in the country. And their data is publicly accessible if you're interested in taking a look. You can take a look at how many planes touched down in an airport or took off, how many carriers, how many passenger carriers, how many freight planes, how many personal planes. You can find all this information. So I decided to look how many personal charter planes flew in to the city of Miami on a monthly basis, going back as far back as I could in the 80s to the present. And what I noticed was that private charter planes, which is where the high net worth individuals travel, they don't travel first class on American. No, they travel in their own plane, right? So I noticed there's spikes every year. Before Art Basel, the spikes would be random. May sometimes would be the peak month of the year. Sometimes it was December. A lot of times in the winter, so like January or November. After Art Basel, the peak every year was December, 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 December. And it's remained so ever since. These high net worth individuals come in and they do exactly what you're saying. They scan the field. What investment opportunities are here? Some of them may have never even thought about coming to Miami. Like I said, the scene of cocaine cowboys. Why would they want to come to Miami? Especially for cultural consumption when you have New York and Chicago and LA doing so much more cultural production than Miami. So they come to Miami, they start scanning the scene. They start looking. They start saying, oh wow, you know what? The downtown area has a lot of just empty space. Our downtown has a lot of empty space. For a major metropolitan city, if you go downtown, actually downtown, and you walk around, you'll see lots empty. When was the last time you saw something empty in New York, right? So they start seeing empty lots, or they start seeing pockets in the market. You know what Miami needs? Miami needs a this. You know what Miami doesn't have? Miami doesn't have a that. And then they start thinking about investing in those types of businesses. And then finally, also, when they come into Miami, if they've got big bucks, they're gonna big spend. So they'll come in and they'll start buying alcohol. They'll start buying food. They'll start buying things in addition to all the art that they're consuming. So when you are the mayor of Miami, when you are up there in this echelon of political world, something like an Art Basel is supremely wonderful for changing the makeup of your city. You start getting a tremendous amount of economic and social importance in the world. Now, one of the things that also adds into it is the network factor, because these wealthy people come and they spend. But one of the most important things in this kind of image is that the same kinds of people start to come to the same types of places every year. And it goes to what we were talking about. You want to see your friends, you want to see your buddies, you want to catch up. So high net worth individuals, in addition to all the things we said, they come to the city to continue on their networks and continue on their partnerships and their friendships. So they will ask you, I'll see you in Miami Beach this December? And they'll say, yeah, I'll see you. I'll see you then. I mean, we're talking about person A who lives in Hong Kong and person B who lives in Berlin have a communal touch point every year in Miami Beach in December, which is fascinating and incredible all at the same time. These are global trotters, globetrotters, and they choose Miami as one of their destinations. So how has this changed the makeup of Miami? So we already hit on one point, which is we are currently in an incredible building spree, right? All of you were here for Hurricane Irma last year, right? You guys remember they were saying that they were afraid about cranes falling over on buildings? Do you guys remember that? And the cranes were swaying like several feet in either direction. The joke right now is that the city bird should be the crane, because there's so many building cranes everywhere dotting downtown and dotting. I mean, any of you, I know most people live on this side, but how many of you live closer east? Yeah? Have you noticed, especially on the 836 going past the Miami Marlins Stadium, there, right along the river, there's just a massive explosion of building. So one of the biggest impacts that this has had is a building spree. Miami right now is hot for real estate. And New Yorkers and global wealthy people all are saying, I cannot believe that Miami is so cheap to build. And building they are. So first off, we're having an incredible building renaissance that I don't attribute solely to the art resurgence, but I do have an argument that says that it is part and parcel integrated into this building boom. But what else has happened? Another thing that has happened is that Miami and Miami Beach has risen in the ranks of a global destination. So now people are looking at Miami differently. So they look at Miami not as this, refuse of drugs and sex and immorality. No. Miami is quickly rising the ranks to become a major arts destination in the world. Art Basel is just one piece of it. But Art Basel allowed for it to begin. So around the planet, people are looking at Miami as a destination, not just for cultural consumption, but possibly to live. Now, Miami itself has a lot to offer, but Florida has one of these things that's quite special, which is no state tax. We do not pay a state income tax. We pay federal. When you make this much money, not having to pay a state income tax is incredibly attractive. And time and again, what you hear is the 6 months and a day rule. In order to prove that you live in Florida, you have to prove that you've lived in the state for at least 6 months and 1 day. So people speak about the 181-day rule, and their lawyers and their tax assistants are always harping on them. You have to prove that you've lived in the state for 181 days. Now, the state is quite large, and there's many beautiful things out there, but now that we have all these cultural items and the fact that these wealthy individuals are flowing through Miami, Miami might be more attractive than St. Petersburg, which has a lot of wealth, and it's a beautiful city, but doesn't have the kind of amenities that Miami's now starting to offer. Or it might be more attractive than Tallahassee, which is the state capital, but doesn't have the kind of global attractiveness that Miami does. So two things have happened in the wake of the transition after Art Basel. One is the building boom, and second is a flow and residency of high net worth individuals. So it used to be flow. They would hit up Miami on their way to go around the world. Now it's a flow through, and they come 1 year for Basel, and they're like, this place isn't as bad as I thought it was. And then they come back year 2, and they're like, you know what? A lot of my friends are starting to live here. Year 3, they come back, and they're like, real estate is so cheap. I can't believe I can get a condo for just $1.5 million. And then boom. Then you have a resident for 6 months and a day at least out of the year. So time and again, this is the kind of process that we are finding ourselves in. Yeah. This is, we have to, because it's private, we do it in like, you know, sideways kinds of ways. So I know from experience, and I was going to get to that now with like working at the Miami City Ballet, I interact specifically with these high net worth individuals. I mean, I'm asking people to donate to me $25,000 in one moment. I had an individual who wrote a check for $100,000 just last week. This is the kind of people. And so from experience, I've noted, and actually part of the appeal that I give to them when I ask them to invest in Miami City Ballet is that I say to them, you can show the IRS that you are a member of Miami City Ballet and that you have tickets to all these performances. They're going to believe you more if they see that you have something that you do there in the city, as opposed to not. So one way is through my personal experience, but another way is you can pull what's called the American Community Survey from the Census Bureau. So the census takes a census every 10 years, but they also have a running survey that happens on 1, 3, and 5-year marks. And what they do is they survey a smaller population of people, but when you aggregate at the 5-year mark, you get a very good representative sample across the United States, so you don't have to wait for the 10-year mark. Well, when you use the American Community Survey, you can find the net flow of people in and out of Miami. And what we found is that there's a tremendous flow in Miami, but there's an increasing number of people who are flowing in and staying in. And what you do is you mirror that with socioeconomic data, and then you can make a kind of educated statement saying, you know what, we don't know if these people are exactly those people, but these two things are happening in tandem, therefore we can make a good assumption or a good statement that high net worth individuals are investing. The other thing is we start to look at property values. So how many buildings are going up? How expensive are those units? You know that if we assume that they're spending 1/3 of their income on their living situation, which they're not, they're spending much less, then you can assume or you can get a good estimate as to how much money they have. If you're buying a condo for $1.5 million, you got money, right? Basically. And often that's just one of their properties. So we have two major things so far that have happened. One is that we've got tremendous amount of building happening in Miami. Two is that we have a tremendous amount of people who are coming into Miami and staying into Miami, high net worth individuals. And three, what this leads to is a kind of bleeding out in the world of culture outside of just visual art into other things like the performing arts and museums. So Art Basel is a visual art fair. It is all about paintings and sculptures and things like that. It is not about dance. It is not about theater. It's not about all of those other things. But how is it that an art fair for visual art can bleed out into other types of arts? Well, these high net worth individuals, they do love art, and some of them come to Art Basel not to buy, but just to see their friends or just to party, because you know Art Basel is a really big, party time. They know it just as much as we know it. But some of them may not have their passion just in visual art. Some of them are incredibly big opera lovers, like we said before. Or some of them are incredibly dedicated to dance. Or some of them think that theater is the upper echelon of culture in the world. And so what happens is that when there's a vacuum or an opportunity, other institutions can build up to address those types of interests. So what I've been talking about up to the moment has been what has really been happening just 2002, talking 16 years. But now what's going to happen is what I conjecture. So this is not anything I can prove, but my statement, my hypothesis is that we're going to see all the arts in Miami get a certain type of rise in notoriety and importance. So for instance, an institution like PAM, the Perez Art Museum, is vastly important, not just for the city, but will become important and is important at a much more global level as a art museum. And so things like Art Basel will impact the kinds of people who would invest in a Perez Art Museum. But other institutions, so all the institutions in Wynwood, like the Lightbox Theater, there's also tremendous amounts of theater. The Florida Grand Opera is another institution for opera, and ultimately Miami City Ballet. So I am the Associate Executive Director of Miami City Ballet, and I'm responsible for overseeing a business, because it is ultimately a business, that is approximately $19 million in a budget. And you can look, all that data is publicly accessible. You can look up exactly any nonprofit, any 501c3, including FIU, you can look up their 990 tax form, and you can see exactly how much money they made, how much money they spent. What's fun with universities is you get to see who their top paid employees are. So at the University of Miami, who's their top paid employee? Anybody want to guess? Not the president. Not cultural affairs, it's what? The football coach. He makes $2 million plus every year, and that's just from the university, not including all the other money he makes from branding, from the football team itself. Yeah, unfortunate. Yeah. But I don't care about UM. That's the thing. I only care about FIU. Go Panthers. So, but not FIU football, you know. So no, FIU. So what we're going to find is that all of these cultural institutions should, if everything continues going in this direction, should level up. And right now at the ballet, we are in that process right now of trying to find, going to your point, like, who are these people, these high net worth individuals that are coming into Miami and deciding to stay here? Every day, I'm trying to find out who these people are, because I'm gonna grab their hands and bring them to the ballet and sit them down and then ask them for money. I mean, that's ultimately what I do. I have to fundraise. I love the ballet. I love the ballet, but it wouldn't be possible without major money in donations. And what we're finding is that our goal, part of our strategic plan in 5 years, is really to elevate Miami City Ballet from being a regional company to being a national and internationally recognized company. So I didn't know that. I mean, I was a big fan of Miami City Ballet even as a graduate student. I had season tickets, you know, super cheap, the student rate, et cetera. We've had interns from FIU. You know, I highly recommend that you all come. But I didn't realize that Miami City Ballet is actually a very important performing arts company. You know, along the lines of the New York Cities of the world and the Bolshois in Moscow, right? So we, for instance, just in this year, we've toured in Charleston, South Carolina, Paris, we're going to New York, Chicago, LA, and that's just before January. So I didn't know this about our own institution. And there's many institutions that are like that here that we just don't know. We just don't know about. And part of it is because we're not a part of the social class where those things matter more, right? I was a graduate student, you know, alongside you guys. I was a student. So I didn't know. I went because I loved it. You know, I would go to PAM because PAM had that cool yoga, you know, in the park kind of thing. Or I went to PAM because they had a new opening. I never went to the opera, you know, I'm ashamed to say, but it wasn't my thing. But what's happening now is that all of these pieces are coming together, and we are finding that what we call the ecosystem of cultural production here should be elevated to another level as a result of this global flow of high net worth individuals. So I think that's the 45-minute mark, right? And we have, I think, an hour, correct? So what I did was I wanted to speak for 45 minutes, but then use the final couple minutes as an opportunity to ask questions. So my goal today was to start at the bottom. What is cultural consumption? Then move up. Why is it important? Then tie it into social class and demonstrate that there's a link. Then I focused on a particular social class, which is high net worth individuals, focused on a particular phenomenon, which is Art Basel in Miami, and talked about how that is changed and is changing Miami as a result. That's what today was all about. So I'll now take any questions that you may have. Yeah. Strategy. So by artists, for artists, it's an event that he puts on. I'm just going to repeat it in case you couldn't hear, where you put on bands, local bands. And the question is, we've been marketing to artists and people like us, right? But should we market to the high net worth individuals? I would say immediately no. But here's why. One of the things that I said in the talk was, rich people like different things than us. F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, said, the rich are different from you and me. And this is a totally different lecture, but basically, part of the way that wealthy people consume culture is a way for them to identify themselves as part of the wealthy. So I always, in that lecture in my class, I would say, isn't it interesting that rich people like opera? Like, why is it that being rich and liking opera is a thing? You know what I mean? Like, is it just that you start liking opera when you become rich? And the ultimate answer is that, no, it's not necessarily that they like the opera, but it's that their other rich friends are going to the opera, and like, it's a rich person thing to like the opera, and essentially, you distinguish yourself as being a part of a social class based on what culture you consume. So my initial reaction is, no, because rich people probably wouldn't come to something like that, right? And so when, for instance, at the ballet, I'll give you an example. How can you entice a massively wealthy person who has everything in the world, everything they could possibly need? How do you entice them to do anything? I mean, these are people who, like, have everything. So what kind of gift could we give them? Or how do we make our special events interesting? In February of this year, we had a high tea. Just a tea, a 2-hour tea, in the most expensive home in Palm Beach, a $143 million home owned by Sidell Miller, who invented the Matrix hair product system. In her home, she had original artwork that Rothko's and Moreau's and Salvador Dali's and statuary. I've never, I mean, to this day, like even describing it to you, I've never been into a place that's this wealthy. I mean, it's just crazy. And we had a high tea. In 2 hours, we fundraised $360,000 from people paying to attend this tea. But no, the big question when we prepared was, how is it that we're going to get a very wealthy person who has everything in the world and access to everything? How are we going to get them to A, give us money, and B, attend an event when they, you know, these are women who like, mainly women, who like play cards and like, you know, Carolina Herrera was there, you know, so we entice them that way. So what we do and what we have to do is that we segment our audiences. So we don't think about what we want to give those people the same way that we think about what we want to give just, you know, our lower level members. So our lower level members, which I encourage you to become one, you know, we have parties and we have free booze and we have access to the dancers who are incredibly, you know, talented and wonderful people who are, you know, our age. They're very young. And so those are types of things that attract that population as opposed to the massively wealthy where we have to figure out, I mean, after a tea like that, we were asking ourselves, like, what the hell could we do to top that? You know, what could we do to top that? So that's a long answer to a short answer, which is no. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That is another example of cultural consumption, the Frost Science Center. Now notice also the relative density of these institutions all in one area. So the two Arch buildings, the PAM building, the Freedom Tower, the Frost Center, are all in this very close proximity. Oh, and also, even though this is not cultural, it's still important. Have you seen that building that has like the waves on the outside downtown? That's being, so that, yes, that building was designed by Zaha Hadid, who recently passed away about a year or two ago. She was by far the most famous female architect in the world, which, I mean, to become a famous architect is big, but to become big as a female, and she was Arab. So you know she was good because all those things are working against her, unfortunately, right? She passed away. Miami has the last building she ever designed before dying, and it's that building. And that building is right there, just a stone's throw away from the Arch as well. So yes, in addition to all the cultural amenities, we're seeing a concentration of it in downtown, tremendously so. Yeah, sorry? The Zaha Hadid building, condominiums. But it's going to be, there'll be parties there. There'll be events there for sure. Awesome question. So the question is, New York, Chicago, LA, as more investment comes into Miami, will Miami retain its attractiveness? That's the question, right? Miami has several things that are going for it and several things that are going against it. So the things that are going for it, tax rebates and tax incentives, cheap labor and willing workforce, non-unionized workforce for the majority of it, unlike New York and Chicago and LA. We have a lot of infrastructure that's in place. The downside is that the infrastructure is not as ideal as we would want. I mean, think about the traffic. When investors look at traffic, they don't see, annoyance. They see money loss because it's actually productivity loss right there. I mean, if you want to transport any goods, you're going to be stuck in traffic for hours. What I see is a trend upwards and continuing in the near future. But the question ultimately remains on, can the city as a whole provide the other things that major cities like New York, Chicago, LA offer, such as institutions of higher learning? So FIU plays a tremendously important role in this. As being one of the largest educators in Florida, in Miami, FIU is vastly important for educating that workforce that these elite businesses will need. Places like not so much, because you get people who come in from out of town and then they leave out of town, right? So what I would argue is Miami-Dade and FIU are probably the two most important factors on that. So institutions of higher learning, public transportation, affordable living to attract future workforce. Ultimately, right now, people are nervous as to whether or not Miami will be able to retain this status. People talk about the fact that it is way too difficult to get things done here as opposed to other places. People talk about the fact that it's hard to entice outside laborers to come in and live in Miami because Miami still has people don't really get Miami. They're not quite understanding it. We don't have the tech hub that other major cities have. The arts are just starting to come up. I mean, there's many different factors that all have to be in alignment in order to encourage pilgrimages of workers. It is interesting that we were a possible candidate for the Amazon headquarter too, although I don't think it's going to happen, and most people would agree on that. Right now, there's skyrocketing values in housing all across these major cities, but unfortunately, Miami is one of the top 10 worst places to rent. It is just way too expensive to rent in Miami. So when you have all of those things aligning, you get more negatives than positives. So fingers crossed that we can do something in transportation and housing, because Miami is definitely an attractive city for somebody who wants, for instance, no winters, no state income tax, fun, and access to a whole bunch of cultural goods and services, and also access to Latin America. Eric? Yep. Mm-hmm. I'm a kind of person who doesn't believe in trickle-down economics, which is basically says that what's good for the ultra-wealthy is good for the rest of the population in some way because their wealth bleeds down through their purchases and such. Unfortunately, there has not been the commensurate activity that's required to prevent all the negative from happening. So things like gentrification are very real, very real. And what we're finding is that we often think of low-income people being pushed out from gentrification, but now what I would argue in Miami is that we're finding just even middle-income people having a significantly hard time to make ends meet, especially with housing and transportation. So there's a tremendously big value judgment to be made right now. And unfortunately, it's residing in the power of politicians who I would argue are not taking the steps that are necessary in order to prevent large-scale negative repercussions. So for instance, with buildings, what you need to do is you need to either tax them heavily or require in writing that certain types of allotments of these units would be made for affordable housing or for workforce housing. Unfortunately, that is not happening. So what I would consider is basically giving these developers, scot-free in building buildings that are attractive to high net worth individuals who might view it as a way to park their money in Florida or as a destination one time a year, but is way too expensive for local folks like us to purchase or to live in. And that actually precedes Art Basel, but has been exacerbated as a result of this large flow of high net worth individuals. It ultimately comes to the question of, if you think of a government as being a business, you think of it as revenues and expenses. Well, the revenues primarily come from taxes, and the tax base is not supportive, put it as bluntly as possible. And so there's many different angles to understanding the kind of negative consequences. I mean, if we look at just culture, I mean, there's a major question to be asked of, does cultural revitalization inevitably lead to economic marginalization? And that is ultimately a major question that most arts administrators have a hard time with, because the answer is ultimately, well, only if you do it the right way. Because I depend heavily on incredibly wealthy individuals to give me money to execute Miami City Ballet. But at the same time, their money can flow and we can put it into other types of initiatives like scholarships for kids who have no money to come and take dance classes, or to keep prices down so that young professionals can attend. And so if it's done right, then yes, but ultimately it's way too difficult to do it that way. So yes, there's many negatives, and a lot of it rests in the powers of our commissioners and our mayors. So Mayor of Miami Beach, the Mayor of City of Miami, and the Mayor of Miami-Dade County all have to work together. And unfortunately, what I would argue is that many of these cities are on a race to the bottom in order to attract investments. And what that means is that instead of just putting it out there and saying like Miami's a great city, what they say is, if you come here, we'll drop taxes, we'll drop this, we'll drop this, we'll drop this. And when you have all the cities in the country doing that, then they're at a race to the bottom. So it's like, well, then you just allowed, Amazon to come into Miami and not pay a single dime in taxes, for instance. So those types of things. So yes, there's a tremendous value judgment to be done. My hope is that philanthropy is deeply tied with high net worth individuals. My hope would be that that philanthropy remains alive. That's an entirely different discussion on philanthropy, but it is unfortunate that we depend on philanthropy rather than just participation in the life of the city. Questions? So before I go, thank you for having me. I do have stuff on Miami City Ballet, because I'm always pushing it, but please take one of these. I know that the ballet sounds like super elitist and foreign, but it is an incredible company. We have tickets as low as $20, $25. And what's really cool is that last year we instituted something new, which was that we put all of the price points, so even the cheapest seats, all of them are in the orchestra level. So you could get a ticket for $25 and be in the orchestra pit. Because what we do is we sell out the orchestra, and then tier 1, and then tier 2, tier 3. So I encourage you to be my guest. Feel free to email me if you're interested. We have a lot of great special events throughout the year. A young professionals group focused on just people like us. And it's just world-class high art. So I encourage you to come and be my guest. If you have any questions, additional questions, or if you're just interested in learning more about Miami City Ballet or hearing more about what I do, you can email me at alfredo@miamicityballet.org. Very easy, alfredo@miamicityballet.org. And I'm here to help in any way that I can. So thank you for coming to this talk. I really encourage you to think about the Global Learning Medallion program if you haven't already. This counts towards that. And so if there's anything else that you need, feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Produced by Academic Video Services within the Division of Information Technology at Florida International University.